Hello everybody, welcome to a Maya tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to be going over Maya's modeling toolkit and specifically using the quad draw tool to add geometry to our pre-existing mesh. So in this case I don't have a pre-existing mesh, so I'm going to go ahead and generate a sphere here, and I'm going to go ahead and scale that up a little bit so we have something to look at. I'm going to click this button right here to enable our wireframe on shaded, and what that'll allow me to do is take a look at the topology that we have going right now, and it'll help me better decide where to maybe place some of these verts that we'll do when we use our quad draw tool. So if I come down and I activate the quad draw tool and I go to start placing these verts, what you'll notice is that they don't get placed on our object. And the reason for that is because we haven't made our object live yet. So Maya doesn't recognize that this is the mesh that we're trying to draw these polygons on. So instead what we'll do is we can select our object here. So make sure that you're in object mode, select your object, and then come up to the top. You can select this little magnet here, and what that'll do is it'll make our P-sphere 1, which is the name of my object, it'll make it a live object. And you can come over here to transform constraint and recognize that we have a live surface as our constraint. So what that means is when we bring up the quad draw tool, and I'm going to sort of get rid of these verts that we had before by holding down Control Shift and getting rid of those. And so now what that'll allow us to do is actually draw our quad specifically on the pre-existing mesh. So this is very helpful for a situation where maybe you need to add pockets to a gene that you've already modeled, or possibly when you're retopologizing a model that already exists. So we'll start off by clicking, and you notice that each time I click, it sort of adds a vert here. And so we'll go around, and I'm just going to add verts sort of where these pre-existing ones already are. And so once I've added those 4 verts, if I hold down the Shift key, for example, it'll allow me to generate a quad that will connect all 4 of those vertices I had created before. And so as I travel around our object and hold down Shift, it'll allow me to generate topology that travels around our object. And as long as I have this object set as my live object, no matter where I drag these verts, they're going to maintain their position on the surface of the mesh. So you notice that no matter where I drag this, it's sort of maintaining its position on along the surface of the mesh. And so obviously that's probably not where we would drag that vert, so I'm going to drag that back over to where it belongs. So from here, what we might want to do is we might want to add a few more cuts in our model. So if I hit the 5 key and come back out to this view, you can recognize that right now we can see these edges, you know, every maybe 3 edges on our actual sphere. But what we might want is to be able to generate a little bit more cuts in our geometry to better match up with the shape of the sphere. And so what we can do is hold down the Control key. And the Control key, what it will do is add a similar functionality to the Insert Edge Loop tool, where whatever sort of edge that you're hovering over while holding down the Control key, it will try to create a cut perpendicular to the edge that you are sort of hovering over. So you notice if I do it on this edge here, and I'll hit the 4 keys just so we can better recognize that. If I hit Control while hovering over this edge here, it generates a vertical line. If I hold Control while over this edge here, it generates that nice horizontal line. And so the first thing we might do, and I'll hit the 5 key again just so we can see what it'll actually do here. So when I generate this cut, you notice that what it will do is it'll actually reposition each of these verts. Even though they didn't exist before, it'll reposition each of those to also be on the surface of this mesh. So I can also add these cuts in here, and so you notice as I travel around, it's actually sort of moving these faces up to the surface of the mesh, right? So from here, once we get to a point where I have enough topology where maybe I'm ready to work from, I might need to smooth it a little bit. So if you recognize right here, we've added these cuts in, but we're still getting these straight lines from here to here, from here to here, and from there to there. And we would want that to look a bit more like a curve to better match the sphere that's underneath. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and you notice when I hold down Shift that we get the relax dialog that comes up. And so if I hold that down, and then click and sort of drag over our mesh, you notice that as I do that, it's sort of smoothing the position of each of these verts. And so I'm just going to sort of drag through and sort of smooth these out just a little bit. Something about like that. And this is something that will take some time. I mean, this is just a little bit of, you'll get used to sort of how it's going to smooth your actual geometry. But understanding sort of how to use the smooth is just as important as understanding the quad draw tool itself. So that would, for example, be a nice smooth surface that we now know matches up perfectly with the sphere that's underneath. So what that would allow me to do is, for example, if I wanted to make this an extrusion, I could grab these faces now by selecting the face tool, selecting the entire mesh, and then doing an extrusion. And if I go ahead and do an extrusion, we can add that sort of depth there. But I know, because I had added these cuts earlier and because I'd used the quad draw tool on my sphere, that this mesh lines up perfectly with the one that's underneath. And this, for example, is probably not dense enough. You could go much more dense with the quad draw tool, obviously. But this is a good example of how I might use it to add maybe a pocket or something like that to a pre-existing geometry.